Today's finally the third day, and today's theme is implementation priorities. So we begin at 9 with engagement and cross-fertilization between research infrastructures and the EOSC ecosystem. And this is co-chaired by Suzanne Dumouchel and Mirjam van Daalen. And then we go into break at 10:45, following which we go to the next session at 11:15. Very interesting session on sustaining EOSC, and this is chaired by Bob Jones. And then we go into a very quick lunch break from 1 to 1:30. But then, please don't forget, from 1:30 to 2, you can still continue having your lunch with us at the Lunch and EOSC Clinic, where you can pose questions to Ronan Byrne and Suzanne Dumouchel. So this is a very, let's say, informal chat. Feel free to ask any questions you may have. And then we start with the final session of the day at 2, and this will go on until 4. This is the technical challenges on EOSC, where we have a number of breakouts on various topics, and this is chaired by Klaus Tofterman. I see that we're now at 9 o'clock and at more than 100 participants. So I'd like to pass the floor to one of the co-chairs of today's morning session, Mirjam.
Thank you very much, Rob, for this nice introduction. So if we could go to the first slide, please. Thank you, Federico. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy to welcome you to the ESFRI session at the EOSC Symposium today. My name is Mirjam van Daalen. I work at the Scherrer Institute. I was part of the EOSC Sustainability Working Group and involved in thematic RIs in the PaNOSC and Expanse project. And I'm a Swiss delegate to ESFRI and the chair of the ESFRI Task Force on the European Open Science Cloud. Today's session will be chaired by Suzanne Dumouchel from EOSC Association and by myself. And the session is structured as follows. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So we have first set the scene by myself and by Suzanne. And then we have a talk from the cluster projects, how RIs work with and benefit from the European Open Science Cloud. Then there are several lightning talks, lightning community paradigm talks, and then at the end we will have a panel discussion, and after that a wrap up. And in the during after the talks, you can ask questions in the chat. And Suzanne and myself will just share these sessions and combine announcing the speakers and asking the questions that come from the floor. Okay, next slide, please. So this session focuses on the engagement and cross-fertilization between thematic RIs and the European Open Science Cloud. And it focuses on user-centric and co-creation aspects of EOSC in the second phase, so post-2020. And it's highlighting the need for a closer engagement and onboarding of the research infrastructures and other thematic communities in EOSC. It's wanting to address and prioritize the actual research community requirements and provide added value for their end users. Relevant work from thematic clouds and communities will be showcased in this session, and we will also show planned activities from the EOSC Association, and major projects such as EOSC Future will be discussed. Next slide, please. So, as we all know, the thematic RIs and their communities are key stakeholders of the European Open Science Cloud. They are providers of thematic quality data and services, and also users of the EOSC horizontal data and services. The broader the federation of thematic RIs in EOSC and the uptake of the horizontal services, the better the chances of the European Open Science Cloud to become sustainable. Next slide, please. Thank you. For this reason, ESFRI is collaborating very closely with EOSC and is a strategic partner in the European Open Science Cloud. For this reason, a task force was put into place already in July 2019 to interact with EOSC on the policy level, strategic level, interact with the science clusters and the thematic RIs and with the horizontal service providers. The task force was prolongated until the end of 2021. We have foreseen now and are in discussion of having a liaison of the task force with the EOSC Association and also the advisory groups and task forces in the EOSC Association. We're setting this up currently. As you all know, there were several several workshops organized already by the task force of ESFRI on EOSC. The first one was in London in 2019, and then we had a virtual conference in 2020 in October on ESFRI and EOSC. And we are planning the next conference, hopefully face-to-face, in September, October this year. Next slide, please. So, and with this, I would like to thank you, and I'm looking forward to a very lively session today. And I would like to hand over to Suzanne Dumouchel from the EOSC Association, and the floor is yours, Suzanne.
Thank you very much, Mirjam. Thank you for the introduction. I'm very glad to co-chair the session today with you on the ESFRI and the EOSC. And I'm already very glad to see that most of the message you've already shared are common to the one I'd like to share right now to you all. So let's start. So what about the community's engagement in the EOSC Association? We already mentioned that yesterday, and it will be more detailed tomorrow in the session on the implementation of EOSC. But of course, the community engagement in the association is made by being part of the advisory group and the task force, more precisely. You already know that there is a dedicated task force to onboard the researcher into the EOSC, with here a high role expected from the ESFRI and the science cluster in this task force. There has been last Friday a science cluster workshop to start discussing interaction between the association and the science cluster. There are the workshop events already mentioned by Mirjam, where we expect to strengthen the links between the ESFRI task force on EOSC and the association. And within the association, we expect to develop a dedicated strategy to engage with the communities, and for instance, by establishing a direct liaison with the board. But it's only the very first and small step that we have already in mind. So what is important here is that the users of the EOSC are researchers at first, and we know that the researchers are disciplinary oriented. So that means that for the EOSC Association, ESFRIs and science cluster are the entry door to bring the users to the EOSC. So what about the role of the ESFRIs and the science cluster? So first, we expect them to bring their experience of user and onboarding and contacting the user and managing them and things like that. So we will rely in the association on their own experience. You know that the EOSC roadmap foresees contribution from the science cluster to stretch beyond the lifetime of the current science cluster project. And they combine the ESFRI and science cluster in the same time that they are service provider and users and data producers and consumer. And here I just would like to highlight the position statement recently published by the ESFRI Science Cluster on EOSC and open science. So what can be the contribution to the EOSC objectives? So first, engaging with the researcher and promote the adoption of open science practices by the research communities, for sure. Participate in the definition of standards and the development of tools and services that allow the researchers to find, access, reuse, and combine the results, and establish a sustainable and federated infrastructure enabling open sharing of scientific results. So what can be the role here of the EOSC Association towards the ESFRI and Science Cluster? First, the association is willing to support the work of the ESFRI and Science Cluster and to highlight their input for the sake of the EOSC, to build from their knowledge the communication towards the community and the service offer, and to offer the right framework to increase interdisciplinarity. So it can be one of the main goals of the EOSC Association to build this framework thanks to the ESFRI and the Science Cluster. So lastly, I can say that while the clouds, and the cloud, maybe it can be said in singular, from the technology, the technical foundation that makes EOSC possible, it's also very important to keep in mind that ESFRI and Science Clusters are the guarantor of the science part of the EOSC. And together they form the overall framework in which EOSC can evolve. So what makes EOSC, for me, so it's here more a personal statement, but what makes EOSC unique today is not necessarily its cloud, but rather its ability to bring together all researchers and research community in the same place. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to you, Mirjam.
Thank you, Suzanne, for this nice talk. There is one question to you from Nicolas Villacorta, which is very quick. The liaison of EOSC with the boards. So what do you mean? This is a question to you, Suzanne. So which board do you exactly mean?
Sorry. Yeah, indeed. No, I was mentioning the EOSC board. So
okay.
Establishing a liaison between the EOSC board and the ESFRI Task Force, but also with the Science Cluster.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, perfect, thank you. So then we come to the next speaker, which is Rudolf Dimper. Rudolf is working at the ESRF in Grenoble. And very involved in coordinating also the PaNOSC project, involved in the EXPANSE project, coming from the photon and neutron community, but today we'll speak on behalf of the different cluster projects, and the topic is how RIs will work with and benefit from the European Open Science Cloud. Rudolf, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mirjam. So it is a great pleasure to be with you again this morning and to entertain you with a couple of slides from the science clusters and how we actually link to the European Open Science Cloud. So let me give you just a brief overview of what we are and who we are as the science clusters. There are 5 of them. They were kicked off in the frame of the EOSC 4 call, which was supposed to, which gives the frame for connecting ESFRI roadmap and landmark projects to the European Open Science Cloud. And that created 5 science clusters: ENRI-FAIR for the environmental science, EOSC-Life for life science, ESCAPE for the physical science and astronomy, PaNOSC and EXPANSE for the structure and function of matter sciences, and SSHOC for social sciences and humanities. If you look at the composition of these 5 clusters, you have here just a really broad overview of these clusters. You can see that there are a significant number of the ESFRI roadmap and landmark projects involved in these 5 science clusters. You see all the logos of them. So this is a considerable critical mass, I would say, of bringing new and ongoing key projects, key research infrastructures of Europe together and connect them to the European Open Science Cloud. And this is depicted here in this diagram, which you may have seen already, showing the 5 science clusters, in the middle EOSC, and how they relate in terms of scientific activities, which they bring into the European Open Science Cloud. And of course, this links very much also to the societal challenges. Now, each of the, one can say, and this has already been said also a number of times, one can consider that each of the science clusters in fact builds a mini EOSC, and now this has to be brought together in EOSC Future to be horizontalized, as when we say now so nicely, you know, we have this vertical, now horizontal dimension, and bringing all the services developed in the science clusters into the European Open Science Cloud as generic services. Now, I don't want to go into the details here of the individual science clusters and their products, their outputs, and which are either already existing or which will now come as a result of the projects until 2022. But you can have a look at these slides later on. Their slides will be online, and browse through the different outputs each of the clusters will provide. And you can see there is, of course, similarity, because obviously, since again, I said that each of the science clusters is in a way a mini EOSC, these commonalities obviously link to the fact that we all deal with fair data, and how fair data can be the bottom, the foundation for services for our communities. So again, the 5 science clusters and their activities and sub-projects linked to EOSC. Now, how do we link now up to the next implementation phase of EOSC, which is very much focused on EOSC Future? EOSC Future is now aggregating all this as the 5 science clusters, and the European e-infrastructure services come together and will now make all this interoperable, which is of course a daunting task, and it relates to the science clusters bringing in fair data and the community services, makes them available to the larger EOSC ecosystem, and connect, of course, the scientific communities from the science clusters to the European Open Science Cloud. And this should be the driving force which allows to build new scientific workflows on top of all this, and which can then become relatively complex, as long as the basic building blocks are in place and work fine. So our role will be to assist also the researchers, and that's the last bullet on this slide, in their exercise of open science in and with EOSC. And this obviously has to be also then a long-term task beyond the project of the science clusters. So what we provide is fair data. And the fair data is located in the different data catalogs in each of the research infrastructures, and is already community-wise interconnected by search APIs, where you can actually interact with the data catalogs in a homogeneous fashion. So this has to be now made interoperable on a larger level, and therefore we work together and look at the standards and ontologies which allow to do this. And then we have to combine these data catalogs to allow new services beyond the communities to be built. The clusters already are minting the digital object identifiers, which allow finding all the data sets. And now, again, this has to be horizontalized to make it overall available in EOSC. Open data. Open data is, of course, only useful if it's in a trusted working environment where the research communities can work together on a long term and have access to the data archives together with the necessary IT infrastructure, which allows to look at the data and to build services on top of them. So that's also needs, of course, storage and compute. This is provided by the research infrastructures to a certain extent, but there are limits which are linked to the individual mandates of the research infrastructures. And that's one of the challenges we will have to address in EOSC, how to provide additional IT infrastructure to scientists or researchers who access all the data, the open data provided by the research infrastructures. Now, open data and a virtual research space for open science, where the researchers can create content and collaborate between them. So the ESFRI science clusters and EOSC Futures and EOSC Future come now together with the science projects. The science projects will allow to demonstrate and actually exercise all the services beyond the individual science clusters. And that is very important, that we now work on how to actually open up the individual cluster services to the larger community. And that obviously will already with the science projects add scientific value, interdisciplinary. So we are more or less touching, I would say, almost the holy grail of EOSC, where you can work on interdisciplinary societal challenges. And we expect that this allows to create innovative algorithms and methods on top of all this, and goes, of course, ultimately into the direction of machine learning, which can only be possible once you have all the data broadly available. You know that the machine learning is very much depending on the data to train the algorithms. Now, two more slides. One for the sustainability of the science clusters. Obviously, the science clusters are projects which will come to an end. They will come to an end typically in 1.5 years, more or less. They don't have all exactly the same starting date, but it's more or less in 1.5 years. EOSC Future will continue a little bit longer. So we already now start the discussions within our science clusters. What will happen with our outputs once the projects finishes, and this clearly has to be based on the research infrastructures. So research infrastructures constitute the backbone of stable funding. We are also funded by public money and have a life expectancy which is much higher, luckily, than the EOSC projects we have. So we have now started to look into how we can actually share the costs between research infrastructures, which will require that we set up a memorandum of understandings and service level agreements to define the cost sharing and the sustainability on a long-term basis. Obviously, one very important aspect also, which we have definitely learned, is to work together between the science clusters. This will continue with representatives from the science clusters. We will not give up working together. We've seen how advantageous this is to coordinate our actions and come together for the common developments and best practices, and this will continue beyond the science clusters. And now my last slide. So what do we need from the European Open Science Cloud? Obviously, as let's say, being the representatives of a considerable number of research infrastructures in Europe, we believe that we have to have a strong voice as also representing our user communities, very large user communities, what happens with EOSC, how it evolves. So we need to be listened at. We hope that we have this entry point to the EOSC Association and that there will be a constructive dialogue and building up. We need EOSC overall for reliable and user-friendly services, the basics. That's AI, that's the data search algorithms, data transfer, access to storage and compute, which have to work rock solidly because this will be the basis for the scientific communities to use them and to develop on top of them. So this has to be sustainable because researchers will only come to EOSC and invest their time and money if they have the trust that this is something which will stay and which is stable in the future. And I think with that, this is, I think, for a basic ingredient for EOSC in the long run. And with this, I thank you for your attention. And obviously, I'm available for time for questions. And I think I have perfectly managed to stay on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rudolf. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Suzanne.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, you are perfectly on time, so thank you for that. There is already a question in the chat from Lisanna Burberry. So you mentioned that each of these science clusters will be onboarded into EOSC as generic services, but will other researchers outside the specific virtual organization set up for each of them have the right to access them? That is the question, please.
Yes, definitely. This is, of course, one of the aims also of EOSC Future, but also of the individual science clusters we will open up. The underlying, I mean, there is, of course, this is what I tried to mention, of course, an issue with the mandate of the research infrastructures. The research infrastructures have all a specific goal, which is, for instance, for the analytical facilities to welcome scientists to do experiments, which generate a humongous amount of data, which will then find its way in the data catalogs and are openly accessible to everybody. However, if now somebody wants to come to the research infrastructure, access the data, and also compute and do science with the data, this is usually today outside of the mandate of the research infrastructures, and we cannot devote a substantial amount of money and effort to sustain that in the moment. This may evolve, and we hope that it will evolve, that also money will be set aside by the research infrastructures to sustain to do this. But today, this is relatively limited. And this is why we need also an additional avenue in EOSC to allow researchers who pick up the data to have a means to process it within EOSC, independent of the research infrastructure. So there has to be sort of co-activity.
Thank you very much, Rudolf. Do we have another question? So you can or write it in the chat, or maybe raise your hand, or if you want to speak directly. No, I think it's, so it was perfectly clear, as mentioned also by Alicia Florio. So thank you very much, Rudolf. And,
thank you very much.
And I think, yeah, thank you very much. So Mirjam, I give you the floor back.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Thank you, Rudolf, for staying in time. We will go to the next part of this session, and we will come to the community paradigm talks. We will start with Karl Presser from FNS-Cloud and Premotec, and the title of the talk is Multidisciplinary Collaboration between the Marine and Nutrition Research Communities. Karl, the floor is yours, and I think we have to go to show also Karl on the screen because I do not see you.
Sorry, Mirjam, can you hear me? Anton Ellenbroek here.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is since these are two clouds that have to collaborate. So
so you will start, Anton. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh no, no problem.
Didn't understand that. Okay, great, Anton. Please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. So this is a lightning talk on the collaboration between Blue-Cloud and FNS-Cloud. So we have been collaborating with FNS-Cloud since April, and we want to show here that we can collaborate as two thematic clouds and to really make data integration much easier and quicker. For that, we have selected a use case, which is called a UFish. That is a data set that has both data from the blue domain, so where does the fish come from, and as data from the FNS domain, where does the fish end up, so the nutrient composition of the fish. Next slide, please. So the Blue Cloud, it is the first project, and then Karl will explain a bit the FNS Cloud. So our mission is to promote the sharing of data, processes and research findings in the marine domain. And we do this in quite a big collaboration in the H2020 project. I will spare you details now. Next slide, please. So we do this through key products and services. So we operate through virtual labs already enabled in the cloud. We have a big data discovery and access services for blue data. So coming from the AMOD nets, the bathymetry, essential ocean variables, but also biodiversity data. And we deliver these through virtual research environments. So you see below, you see 5 examples of key virtual research environments. Next slide, please. So with this collaboration with FNS Cloud, so the Blue Cloud for the blue data, FNS Cloud for the food and nutrition security data, and Karl will quickly introduce the FNS Cloud.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, also from my side. Thanks, Anton. Yeah, let me quickly explain the FNS Cloud. So the FNS stands for Food Nutrition Security. So we're also kind of called the Food Cloud, as we know. And the collaboration with the Blue Cloud is quite nice because some of the ocean items, they're landing on our plates. We eat them, we consume them. And so we have a very nice kind of connection there that we're interested in each other's data. So the FNS Cloud is very new. So we really started kind of building the community. We're building this first generation of a thematic EOSC cloud, which is basically the food cloud, where we merge existing data sets, tools, and services together. We are quite a big consortium because also it shows a little bit how splitted this, how fragmented the food landscape is with many small data sets. So we're 35 beneficiaries from 11 countries, and they give us 4 years time to build up also the community, implement the first ones, and yeah, the budget is set at 10 million euros. Next slide, please. So I want to give you the overview because we are so new and so fragmented, and we're divided our outcome in 3 demonstrators, which is more or less a thematic grouping. So the first one is in the agri-food, which is more kind of from the agriculture, where the food comes from, so very the same. So the first one is kind of advanced catalog. So we followed very much the EOSC approach and said, okay, first of all, we need a catalog to find available data sets in the food area. And so we have an example of an olive oil supply chain from the tree to the consumption there. And then along this food supply chain, we try to identify the different data sets which are available and put them in a catalog. And this must be quite advanced because they're very specific for food items and very specific for food supply chains, so that they're not all the same. And so this is one of the catalogs, the outcomes of the project. So also in this group, there is also the branded foods database. So we have this food products from the supermarkets and then many producers, and all this data is also spread over the internet or even on the products, and we try to bring them together in one database that also products getting comparable, and the data can be used for the research community. The next point in there is the exposure. So food also have some contamination in it, which can be harmful for the human and the animal bodies. And so we're also checking there, bringing together the data from consumption data and the contamination data, and then checking there the exposure for certain data. In the second pillar or the second demonstrator it's about nutrition and lifestyle, where many consumption surveys are done across Europe. There are very many data sets, and we try to bring them together in one database, put them together and make some analysis tools for the researchers that they can really analyze the consumption behavior of people. A little bit also kind of for the end user, we have also here this seed exchange platform for gardening people, and they also integrate their family meal planning so that the own gardening together with the family seed planning is optimal for nutrition lifestyle purposes. And the last pillar is non-communicable diseases and microbiome. So there goes more inside the body of a human, what happens in your gut. And so there is quite a complex study where they measure different microbiome stuff. And also the food-drug interaction is one of the outcomes. Certain foods have interaction, they interact with drugs, medication. And so we have to collect this data. So we basically want to extract this data from available publication and make a database available for clinical organizations, but also for the researchers. That's kind of an overview, quick overview of the FNS-Cloud.
Okay, so we have the fish, we have the recipes. So now let's start cooking. So you see that the collaboration between Blue-Cloud and FNS-Cloud in a lightning talk has to be very quick. So we can only explain a few of the high level things. So we started this year with some developments already. So how can we exploit the services from the Blue-Cloud to get data from the FNS-Cloud and vice versa and have a reliable data exchange. So we started a service-driven experiment this year to test the feasibility for data sharing and harmonization. And the goal was to release a fish food composition data tables, an in-foods product that is already used globally. So it's an existing data set, and FAO needs an upgrade to this data set with better code, with better references, and with better quality data. So we see this data coming from the FNS-Cloud. We see other parts of the data coming from the FAO more blue domain. We notice, for instance, that there are codes for fish and there are codes for the same as an animal and a different code for the same animal when it is a product. So we need to build a lot of bridges. Sorry. And we use, to do that, we rely on reference data that come from key institutes and FoodX2 codes. We developed a new data entry tool in the Blue-Cloud. In the right, you see an example of a screenshot of this new data entry application. And you see that it relies on a lot of reference data, for instance, from the area. So where does the fish come from? We can now be very specific in where a fish comes from, which is very important if you want to understand its nutrient composition. We know exactly what year it was caught with, so we can even use this data in traceability studies. So we help people understand where a fish comes from, if it was fish sustainable. And then we go more into the food domain. So we understand who is managing this and what is the food composition table name. It is for people that are more interested in how to do this. It is with an Angular, Java, MySQL application that is already deployed as a Docker application in the Blue-Cloud, which means we use Blue-Cloud generic services for user management, for uptime, downtime management, for resources storage, and other services. This was done only in 70 days of development. So this really shows that if you have two clouds collaborating and people have the mindset to a shared topic, if the topic is not too complex, you can be really quick in leveraging all the benefits of a generic services into a real application. If you're interested, you can even use the URL here and see what it looks like. It's not really a functional prototype, but it shows you what the type of data contents are. Next slide, please. So how do we see this then in the larger EOSC and future perspective? So we will, as FAO, continue on UFISH data entry tool. That is, we are very selfish. That is our only interest. But we will use this then to establish proxy values estimates. For instance, if you have two similar fish that swim in the same ocean, we assume that they have the same food composition. That helps us really a lot in understanding the food situation in small-scale fisheries communities, for instance, in remote Indonesian islands, where we only have a very few data, and then by using proxies, we can understand the food situation. That is the food systems analysis. And then we also want to understand more what is the internal trade systems, what comes to capitals of cities in terms of food and nutrients from fisheries. So we will continue to test this then in a more traceability oriented part. I think that is more interesting for Karl. So to understand in food systems, where does the nutrients come from and how do they end up in what format and form on people's plates. And then we also want to work in this project towards sustainability. So how do we bring this data set to a level where it becomes a service? So that is then where I think more the interest of EOSC collaborations. So how can collaborations like EOSC help us to make this data available, sustainable? And we think we need support for instance, the reference data systems from a European level, so FoodX2. What is a proper protocol? What is the proper methods to do a food analysis?
Anton, sorry, could you conclude, please?
Yeah, that is my last
great.
my
Thank
famous
you.
last words. And then
okay, good. Thank you.
So that is very quick. So we see this as a collaboration opportunity in the EOSC domain, where we have support for the more generic services, and we will then build on top of that. We will build these specific applications. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you both for this presentation. So there had been a question in the chat, but I think yeah, Karl, you already answered to it. So maybe we can move to the next talk. Mirjam.
Thank you. So the next talk will be by Jennifer Edmond from DARIAH SSHOC from the SSHOC cluster, and the talk is the SSH Open Marketplace with shocking tools and services. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Mirjam, and thank you everyone for the interesting conversation so far. And I have to say, this isn't my title, so apologies if I can't actually give you the shocking tools and services. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think with all of these clusters, the most important thing probably to remember is the European Research Infrastructure Consortia that sit behind them. Unlike projects, we have this long durability, and I think that's a real key asset for the EOSC ecosystem. So within our particular cluster, we have CESTA, ESS, Cher coming from the social sciences domain, but of course also Clarin, DARIAH, my own organization, and IRIS coming from the more cultural and humanistic side. And again, with the exception of IRIS, which is becoming an ESFRI roadmap or an ESFRI ERIC in the future, the rest of the ERICs are all labeled already as ESFRI landmarks. Can we go to the next slide, please? The important thing I think to remember, though, is that the ESFRI landmarks and projects in the cluster, and I think we are not unique in this, are really the tip of the iceberg. So what you see, if I'll just pull out a few of these, I won't go through all the partners, but for example, one of the key assets, I think, of the SSHOC cluster that you wouldn't find necessarily an equivalent for in the others are partners such as LIBRE, the Consortia of European Research Libraries. Bear in mind that if you work in the humanities, the research libraries, the museums, the archives, this is where our research data has sat for centuries, literally. So having a close relationship with them, finding a way to bring that data into the EOSC is of central and essential importance for us. But also underneath the research communities, again, you'll see the UK National Gallery with their collections coming in, but you'll also see partners and projects hidden below that, such as the migration survey that is providing one of the case studies. So it's really quite a diverse ecosystem. And again, I think every cluster is diverse, every cluster is heterogeneous, but the specificities of the data actually create what we need to do a little bit differently and why the clusters need to exist. Can we go to the next slide, please? So to give you in a nutshell, I think some of this will not seem any different from the other clusters. As I said, the specificity lies at the level of dealing with those disciplines and the data that actually makes up the work we do. So really, the reason why we have come together as the SSHOC project and consortium is to build the cloud, the EOSC for the SSH, to make sure that there is that kind of specificity and that kind of discipline sensitivity to create that onboarding and that seamless movement between the very data-driven and the important services of the EOSC and the sharing ethic of the EOSC and the disciplines that we all serve. And again, the values underpinning that are to maximize data reuse, in particular through open science and FAIR principles, and of course the various tools that we use. Again, our specifics would be different, but the values are very much the same. To interconnect the RIs within our clustered cloud infrastructure, and also to set up a governance. Rudolf mentioned the question of sustainability, and I can say we are all very committed to the sustainability of what we're building in SSHOC. And again, our position as ERICs, rather than merely a project, actually allows us to do this. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I think this sort of slide boils down a lot of that specificity I've been talking about, or at least at a high level, if you can be boiled down at a high level. I think the idea that we have these cloud-ready SSH tools and high-quality SSH data is really, that's the core requirement for any of the clusters. But of course, the fact that we can provide trusted and secure access to this. Again, trusted and secure access is not unique to us, but dealing with, for example, survey data means you need a different kind of set of protections than maybe if you're dealing with biomedical data. So again, ensuring that we can align with the requirements of the research communities and make sure that there is that seamless transfer between the researcher, the individual, and the wider EOSC ecosystem. We have the Open Marketplace, and this is again where the tools and services can be found in a way that is contextualized and enhanced so that researchers can actually make meaning out of them and reuse them in ways with their own data or with the data that they find through the EOSC ecosystem. And of course, we think that the interoperability access of FAIR really is about intellectual interoperability as much as it is about technical interoperability. And so we actually focus a lot on training materials, and trainer network in order to allow people to intellectually onboard, which we think is quite important, the convergence of the disciplines towards an interdisciplinarity. You can see our various stakeholders there. And again, the research libraries and archives are at the top of that picture for a reason, but we also have the researchers, the civil society organizations, policymaking, and various others that you would find also in some of the other clusters. Can we go to the next slide, please? I want to pause there. I realize I could tell you more about the specificities of what we're building in SSHOC, but I think it's actually what I can do better is give you a bit of an example of why I think the SSHOC cluster and all of the clusters are so important as a way of maybe instigating a bit of conversation at the end of this session. If you think of an individual researcher, I think, for example, of a researcher I know in my own institution. He's an environmental historian, works mostly in the medieval era, and he can work very well with data that he finds either in his own local research group or in a library and archive. But when he comes into the ecosystem of my particular ERIC, then he can find the specific instrumentation he needs to actually use that data in a different way. Once we bring him into the SSHOC ecosystem, then there's the possibility of taking that environmental data, for example, historic annals, medieval chronicles, and actually using that alongside more contemporary data. And I would say you could put all the clusters there because this particular researcher I'm thinking of also uses ice core samples. Again, a different kind of data than we necessarily see, but you can see how that research becomes richer the further up this value chain or the further up this continuum he goes. And then once we have those stable, interoperable, durable, and dependable systems that we're all being provided at that lowest level of infrastructure, or most fundamental, let's not say low, because obviously it's quite complex, then you can really see how this individual researcher can move from that which he can find in his own local environment, in his own local discipline, to something that is actually much more powerful. So I think it's important, first of all, to think of the EOSC not as a single place, as I said in the chat, but as a continuum, as an ecosystem, and be very clear about the roles. You know, when Rudolf says that we have to be onboarded into ecosystem, I think I actually am part of the EOSC. And actually, certainly my researchers see what DARIAH is doing, what SSHOC is doing as a part of the EOSC. So again, I think there's a need for using the maturity we have to refine this language at this point. And you see how the ERICs really are the intellectual middleware within the ecosystem. And if you'd like a more down to earth for early in the morning, because I'm sitting in Ireland, so I'm an hour earlier than the Central Europeans. If you go to the next slide. So if the data is the bread, right? So the researcher is hungry, he has a question he wants to answer, he's got the data maybe, but he wants something more. So if he wants something more, he wants toast. If you want toast, you need the device, you need the instrument, you need the integration, you need the plug sockets and the plugs, and you need the electricity. And I think that this kind of image can really help us think in a very complementary way about how the high-level services and the researcher really act in that continuum and the important role that both the clusters and the individual ERICs can play in that. So maybe we can, you can fight my my metaphor later. Bring a humanist to a party and you'll get a metaphor. So that's my last slide. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for this very enthusiastic talk, and I really like, of course, this idea of EOSC as an continuum, infrastructural continuum. I think it's interesting. Do we have some question for Jennifer in the chat, or maybe someone would like to speak? No, not yet. Yes, there is one. So from Richard Denis, how is SSHOC doing this on the technical level? So what is this? So it would be informative to discuss what the ecosystem in terms of interoperability and FAIR. I think something is missing here in the first sentence. And then how is SSHOC doing this on the technical level? Maybe Richard, you can explain a bit more what you have in mind? help Jennifer answering?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah, I actually am quite active in the SHOC community, and I know that folks that out there may not be highly more informed as I am. So just for the community, I'd be interested to know. It's great and it's wonderful what you said about the researchers, but from a technical perspective, what's SHOC doing to make sure that that when the services become available within the EOS, are they building a solution? What kind of a solution? What kind of what kind of tools are they doing? This would be quite helpful for the community to understand it. I understand that they were in the process of partnering and with DANS, KL, looking at Dataverse as a potential solution. That's something that I haven't heard about yet. So this is the sort of information that I'm trying to seek to understand what the community is actually doing to make sure that it is going to be ready when the train starts to leave with the EOSC.
So it's a good question, Richard. It sounds like actually in some ways you may know the answer already. And of course, in a 6-minute presentation, I can't go into all of the diverse services. And that's actually one of the important things to remember is that really many of the partners in SHOC are actually building towards the interlinking pieces, again, the intellectual middleware and look, we know that technical problems are easy to solve and social ones are hard. So I think actually we're taking very much a community-driven approach. But let me give you one example. So within my own ERIC, DARIAH, we're leading the work on the DARIAH Marketplace. Now, there's been a lot of attempts to build marketplaces for the arts and humanities to find tools to work with data. In fact, there was a very high profile project called Bamboo that was very well funded in the US and which quite famously failed. There's actually an even more famous paper about what happened to Project Bamboo. The reason why Bamboo failed, I think, is in large part because it was driven from the top down and was not sensitive enough to what a researcher actually needs to adopt a tool into their tool chain and actually to bring it to their own data, because it was lacking community support, it was lacking sustainability, it was lacking context, it was lacking examples. So if you look at the SSH Open Marketplace, the way that this has been reconstructed as not just a registry of tools, but a registry of tools that actually shows how it's been used, where it's been used, how it fits into various workflows. I mean, you could say, is this at the technical level? To my mind, this is actually more at the social level. This is about providing the kind of information that the researchers that we know best actually need to use the sorts of enablers that will allow them to be full participants in the EOSC ecosystem. And I think you could make a similar statement about many of the tools that are being developed within SHOC. So for example, the Clarin language switchboard or the ALE tool for annotating 3D objects. So I think, again, there's this case to be made for each. For this audience, I thought I wouldn't go too deep into that, but obviously there is myself, and I think there's others in the audience as well, where we could go deeper into these tools as well, if there was an interest in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you for answering. So I think there are already a lot of points to be discussed in the panel and maybe more in the future. So let's move to the next presentation. Mirjam, if you want to introduce. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. So there is a very lively discussion in the chat, as Suzanne said already. So we are going to the next talk, which is from EOSC-Life. And Carol Goebel will give the presentation from the University of Manchester. And the talk is called the EOSC-Life Workflow Collaboratory. Carol, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to this presentation. So I'm going to be talking about a specific part of EOSC, which is the Workflow Collaboratory. Next slide. So the EOSC-Life is a pan-national digital space for biosciences data, also methods. We've heard quite a lot about data at the moment, but we're also concentrating on the use and sharing of computational methods. So this is putting not just data into the cloud, but also enabling the processing of data and the sharing and exchange of computational processing techniques of that data in the cloud. The EOSC-Life project is a cluster of 13 life science related thematic infrastructures, and we range from compounds to biobanks, from genomics to marine, from clinical trials to plant phenotyping. So it's quite interesting to think, what is a thematic cloud here, or thematic research infrastructure? Although we have all bio in common, the thematics is quite broad. So how do we propose to be able to bridge some of this and contribute to EOSC? And by the way, we are all EOSC. I completely agree with the earlier speaker. The next slide, please. So one example of the kinds of things that we do from the computational point of view is processing. So here is an example of some of the things that we're doing in EOSC-Life, where we've been very active in the SARS activities, SARS-CoV activities. We have been key in establishing the COVID-19 data portal for Europe. And there we are accessing data, national data resources, and also community resources such as the European Nucleotide Archive. But we also set up continuous monitoring for pre-processing data, monitoring that data, analyzing the data through these computational processes called workflows, which then we can redeposit in national dashboards, in notebooks for researchers, and other databases. And we can also share those processings in a registry of methods, a registry of workflows. So this, and in that way, we can also deal with data quality. We can also inspect the methods that we have developed and make them open to scrutiny. Next slide. Now, it turns out that there are these kind of computational multi-step processes, workflows across all of our EOSC Life stakeholders, from structural biology through to metagenomics, which covers the metagenomics of the oceans, as well as metagenomics of the human gut, through to drug discovery and translation. So these kinds of computational processes are pervasive, and they are actually a profound entry point into EOSC. So not just the data, but the methods that can process those data. Next slide. So in EOSC-Life, we have assembled, driven by the needs of the users, developers, and the infrastructure administrators, a collaboratory in order to be able to support and share and execute these kinds of computational workflows, where we're really placing workflows as first-class citizens. And this is a schematic of the Collaboratory that we have assembled. And note that we have many different kinds of systems. We're working in an ecosystem of platforms. We have different kinds of workflow systems, such as Galaxy or SnakeMake and Nextflow, all used by our researchers in the community. We have many different packaging systems. We have a set of registries, all developed by our communities, and we have the infrastructure that we are implementing over. So this is very much a community-driven activity, and researchers, we have no problem with accessing researchers and getting EOSC used by our researchers, because our researchers are using these resources and these services, and we are really just enabling them to do it better. Next slide. So a key piece that we wanted to emphasize here is that this is implemented and running, co-designed with our users, but we have developed these services for our users. They are also cross-cutting and horizontal services. So for example, Galaxy Europe, which is a workflow system, has 32,000 users, but is also used not just for biology, but for astronomy, for ecology, for climate modeling. We operate a compute infrastructure called Pulsar that ranges across computational sharing across Europe and Australia. We have a registry for being able to deposit these workflows, which is system and application agnostic. And we have monitoring and testing services. Can you press the next slide? We also have developed technologies and techniques, again, community driven, for being able to standardize how you describe these workflows and tools using commercially recognized standards such as schema. We have standardized descriptions of workflows, again, developed by the community. We have mechanisms for secure federated processing of sensitive data. And we have also developed a fair digital research object technology, which again has been established by the community, which we have adopted in order to be able to exchange our workflows and data and to enable our service interoperability between all of our different platforms, our registries, and our testing services. Next. And this particular infrastructure turns out to be completely generic and has been not only used in EOSC-Life, but has also migrated into earth sciences and the biodiversity community, as well as EOSC services, such as through the CS3 mesh for EOSC project and Open Air. Next slide. So as an example, the DISCO research infrastructure, which is a natural history collection digitization platform, is really needing to be able to digitize the huge number of collections that it has of pinned insects and herbarium, only about 10% of which are actually digitized. And so the infrastructures that we have built in this workflow collaboratory are being used by that DISCO project in order to be able to do the specimen data refinery, to do those digitization processes. And the digital object approach that we have developed is being used to pioneer the notion of a digital butterfly, the notion of a digital twin for each of the specimens used in the natural history collections. The Reliance project is building earth science data cubes. And again, that is using the digital object technology that we developed in the EOSC-Life workflow collaboratory in order to be able to pull together the different components of data into data cubes. So the point we wanted to make here is that we're not just developing workflows to access and analyze data across disciplines in EOSC-Life, but also the infrastructure and technologies transfer across the EOSC-Life partners, but also across other research infrastructures. And these research object-based services will really help to connect resources available via other EOSC services and related research infrastructures. Next slide. And I wanted to finally finish up on the fact that we really have built this all in a very open community effort. This is how we do our governance. We do it very openly. We do it with multiple partners. And in this way, we really feel as if we're engaging with our users, that we're steered by our users, and that we can bring EOSC to our users, as well as providing cross-cutting services to other partners across the ESFRIs and to EOSC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. As we are running a bit late, we suggest Mirjam and I to add the question directly in the chat if there are some, so Carol and all the speakers can answer directly in the chat. So Mirjam, if you want to introduce the next speaker, please.
Thank you, Suzanne. So the next speaker is from ESCAPE. The title is Expanding EOSC Participation by a Factor of 1,000, Citizen Science in the EOSC. And the speaker is Stephen Sergeant from the Open University and of course from the ESCAPE project. So Stephen, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can I just check that you can all hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Perfect, excellent. So I'm going to talk about expanding EOSC participation by a factor of 1,000, citizen science in the EOSC. And I'm going to start with a provocative statement. Provocative statement is that making data fair is easy compared to making fair data useful. And I'm going to show this with an example. So there was a gamma ray observatory called Fermi, which put all of its data in the public domain. And another team analyzed it and found that there was a curious excess of flux around the galactic center, which I've shown there, which they interpreted as dark matter annihilation. And that's a huge result if it's true, because we know very little about dark matter. But then the original instrument team responded and argued that it's more likely to be an instrumental artifact. Now, I don't want to take sides in this particular discussion, but I just want to point out that data have pitfalls, instrumentals, systematics, all sorts of things. And users need training. Okay. Now, my second provocative statement is that the science-inclined public is both the largest and the most overlooked group of EOSC stakeholders. It's certainly how it sometimes feels to me working in a citizen science environment. I'm going to show an honourable exception to this. This is a diagram from a talk last year. And I've credited the people who gave it at the bottom, and it does show citizens as key stakeholders in EOSC, which is absolutely excellent. But even this good diagram doesn't communicate the size of the community. Here is one very successful citizen science experiment. It's classifying astronomical data and genuinely doing co-creation of data and metadata, and it's creating labeled training data for machine learning. So if you want to do machine learning, you have to have these labels, so you have to have the citizen science. And what I want to point out is the science team are just 10 academics, but look at the size of the number of volunteers, nearly 30,000 volunteers. And there is training for these volunteers built right into the project. So some people during this meeting have talked about MOOCs, standalone massive open online courses. And they're great, they have their place, but they're not always the right answer. Here, the training has to be embedded into the project. And the lesson I'd like to take away is that, from this is that the only way to have two-way engagement and training of a factor of 1,000 more EOSC users quickly is to do it through citizen science. So this is a community we really don't want to neglect. My third provocative statement is that citizen science is not outreach. It is a way of doing science. It's like a biological computer. It's like a multi-headed hydra of hundreds of thousands of wonderful human volunteers, okay, who are there for you so that you can do your science. Think of citizen science like a spectrometer or a microscope or a beamline. It's a machine of wonderful volunteers who are there to help you do your science. So we have these three provocative statements, and I want to present to you with this vision for how citizen science and EOSC can mutually benefit. And it's a genuinely two-way interaction of benefits. Okay. So, for example, in ESCAPE, we are building a science analysis platform that Mark Allen will be talking about later in this meeting. And it's linking many major data sets, including citizen science data sets. And this is done by my postdoctoral research fellow, Hugh Dickinson, who is absolutely excellent. And our aspiration is that you should be able to manage your citizen science projects from within EOSC. It's currently an unfunded aspiration, but it's something we hope to achieve. And it goes the other way too. The benefits go the other way too. So volunteers already can go from a citizen science project, in this case Galaxy Zoo, click on links and take them straight into professional tools so that they can start doing their own data mining within EOSC. Now, currently, the professional tools that it jumps out to are not EOSC tools, but that's something that I hope we can fix. So here again is my vision for how citizen science and the EOSC can have a mutually beneficial relationship. It's, I believe, a realistic plan for a genuinely two-way win-win benefits for citizen scientists and experts and the European Open Science Cloud. And I just want to finish with a final provocative statement, which For some science specialists might not be provocative, but for some people might give some pause for thought, and that is that no single EOSC interface will suit everybody. And that's everything I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for this very interesting and clear talk and your provocative statements, which I think we all recognize very well. So if there are questions, you can answer them in the chat, because we have to proceed because we're tight in time, but thanks very much again. I will go to the next talk, which is about researcher engagement, visions, needs and requirements, by Katharina Flicker from the TU Vienna and from the EOSC Secretariat. Katharina, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. So, as already mentioned, I work at the Wien, and one of our tasks as EOSC Secretariat partner is researcher engagement, which means onboarding researchers to the EOSC initiative, identifying current barriers and services considered essential for a well-functioning EOSC, obtaining a better understanding on how research is changing, and collecting visions, needs, and requirements for future research environments. In case you're interested in the results, I put the links on the last slide, because for this talk, I was asked to specifically focus on the challenges we faced in terms of researcher engagement and the lessons learned from these challenges. Next slide, please. So we decided to directly approach researchers. We organized workshops and online sessions. We conducted 24 interviews, and by doing so, we built up a network of around 69 researchers who also provided us with feedback on how the onboarding process could be improved. Let's jump to the next slide, please. So from that feedback, we extracted 4 main challenges. We called the first one saturation, meaning that researchers appeared to have heard a little too much about EOSC without hearing about how they might benefit from it. After all, stakeholder engagement started over a year ago. The EOSC has therefore been talked about for quite a while, which was perceived as such without any concrete services or tools being communicated. The second was labeled the Emperor's New Clothes. It refers to the challenge of answering the what is the European Open Science Cloud question with metaphors. And even though metaphors may transport the spirit of what the EOSC initiative is, they do not really provide concrete answers. For example, the EOSC started out being an elephant in 2019, only to end up being a huge ship sailing on a sea of data. Information overflow deals with floods of reports, presentations, acronyms, other materials that were being produced, all while the information provided was a little too abstract and too scattered, and it also wasn't entirely clear where to get the information that was actually needed. And that really was a major barrier to researcher engagement. All of that supported a not my business attitude, which was further fueled by trying to promote the EOSC without communicating, offering concrete benefits for day-to-day research. Next slide, please. So what did we learn along the way? For future researcher engagement, we would need to find a way of clearly answering questions about benefit as well as about concrete services. We should think about the kind of information that is needed and wanted and provided in a digestible way. And we need to keep in mind that what doesn't yet exist cannot be sold easily to a critical audience. Let's jump to the last slide, please. So as mentioned before, the results are listed here, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the chat, or you can always drop me a mail. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katharina, for this nice talk. I will hand over to Suzanne now for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Mirjam. Thank you, everyone, for this first lightning talk. So let's. I would like now to introduce the panelists. So first, maybe to introduce the panel, I'm very pleased to note that yesterday in the Menti.com, the researcher engagement topic has been mentioned as one of the most important one and on the top priority for the EOSC. So I think this is something really interesting and that we can discuss already. So I'd like to welcome for our panel, I'm particularly glad to welcome Niklas Blomberg from Elixir and EOSC-Life, Ron Decker for the CESDA Eric and the project EOSC Future, Rudolf Dimper from the European Synchrotron and PaNOSC Expanse, and Tiziana Ferrari from the EGI Foundation. So there has been, thank you all for accepting to be there and to be part of this panel today. So I'd like to start by asking Niklas, Ron, and Tiziana to make a short statement, as we already hear from Rudolf a bit earlier, and then we can start the discussion. So maybe Tiziana, would you like to start?
Thank you, Suzanne, and for the opportunity to be in this panel. I'm Tiziana Ferrari, Director of the EGI Foundation, and bringing in this panel the experience that EGI and other e-infrastructures like OpenAir, EUDAT, and Jeanne have been gathering in working in the past few years with ESFRI clusters, research infrastructures at European and national level. I'm a project coordinator of EGIAs, which is one of the e-infrastructure projects which is supporting the EOSC implementation agenda in phase 2, and in particular the computer platform, which is a distributed cloud and data management platform for data exploitation. We have, briefly speaking, a track record in collaborating with international research collaborations. We have already been supporting thousands of users, and the co-creation, co-development, customization of services of general interest have been an enabler. And I will look forward in this panel to bring our experience and best practices on what we have been achieving together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tiziana, for this. So let's move now to Ron.
Yes, thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for having me. I'm Ron Decker. I'm director of CESDA and also coordinator of SSHOC, and recently also became the coordinator for the EOSC Future project on behalf of Technopolis. In dealing with this topic on EOSC and how ESFRIs and EOSC can come together, for me the key word is engagement. And I think Stephen addressed it very well. I didn't find these statements provocative at all. I think they are true. It's the engagement, and yes, we have a technical challenge, and we have the challenge from the data clusters on aligning and making data comparable. But I think, as Stephen was saying, we have to proactively reach out to the researchers. If the researchers don't start using Jennifer's toaster or using the EOSC tools, then it doesn't make sense. So let's focus on this engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, for this statement. Very clear. So we have to focus on the engagement. Maybe we can discuss a bit later how to engage and what is engagement exactly. So let's move to Niklas, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Niklas Blomberg. I'm director of Elixir and also coordinator of the EOSC-Life project. So just a couple of thoughts to get started. So The first is, I mean, the title of this session is Cross-fertilisation between RIs and the EOSC, and I think that's wrong. I think it should be cross-fertilisation between the RIs within EOSC. And the reason I say that is that over the last couple of years, I think we've seen a lot of very, very good collaboration, both within each of our clusters and actually increasingly between the clusters. And Rudolf, I think, represented that link very well. And we also see it in practice. You could see some of the workflows from Carol in her talk. And I think this is really incredibly valuable because we're now starting to develop this sort of next generation of interdisciplinary data projects within Horizon Europe. They're all aligned with EU missions. And I think the cluster structure and the collaboration between the different research infrastructures within ESFRI is really a strong foundation for developing these mission-oriented sort of EOSC solutions. And I think the other part of that I'd like to pick up on, and we've seen it also now in the first wave of Horizon Europe calls, is the importance to link the work we're doing on data and tools and workflows and the sort of computational side within EOSC with the transnational access programs in the research infrastructure program, because that is really where we will interface a very large body of researchers who will come to the research infrastructure facilities. They will access the biobanks, they will make use of advanced services for clinical trials, or they will visit the advanced microscopes. And actually if we do this well, we enable researchers that are also at institutes with less strong sort of computational and institutional infrastructure to do advanced data analytics in our case in life science, but I think it's true across the life sciences. So in that sense, I see EOSC then as part of the sort of democratization of science within the European research area. And I think that those two aspects are really important to focus on now when we are moving into sort of EOSC in practice. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niklas. So I think it opens well the first question I'd like to ask you all about it. So do you think what kind of good practices or recommendation are already coming up from the first phase of the EOSC and the related project for search across fertilization? Do you have some examples that you can highlight and explaining how for you the cross-fertilization is what kind of practices can highlight that? Rudolf, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, first of all, I think that as Niklas has pointed out, we are very fortunate that we have the science clusters, and that in the frame of the science clusters, we were able to establish now links between them, which are extremely useful and productive, and this obviously has to continue. Having said this, I think we're all facing one paradigm, which is, let's say a bit worrying, that we all work hard to be part of EOSC and to make EOSC happen, but we are not yet there. We need more. The engagement of our user communities is not yet at a level which we would like. And on the same time, we are developing fantastic tools, which will definitely add a lot of value to the data we bring into EOSC. So the next phase, more than the first phase, is probably also all about communicating correctly, and that's an enormous challenge because there are so many stakeholders, there are so many people involved in EOSC, but we somehow have to be good in carrying over the messages, making known what has been done, what is available, what maybe doesn't work yet, and sort of carry over this message to everybody and make it transparent. And that goes bottom up as it was also top down. I mean, it's clear that in many of the research infrastructures, the upper management levels have heard about EOSC, but have no precise idea of what we are actually talking about and what are the potential impacts. So there is a lot of work in front of us, which is challenging, but also very interesting. And we simply have to be together in it and do it.
Thank you, Rudolf. Does anyone want to react or to answer to the question? Yeah, Ron, please.
Yes, thank you. Let me give an example, and it's from SHOC, not yet from EOSC, but you can see what happens. When I was in labor market research ages ago, I had to calculate net income from the surveys that only provided the gross income, and I had to do this for several countries. And this literally took me months because you had to understand the systems, how it works in all these countries. In SHOC, we now have implemented an application based on OECD material where you can calculate the net income from if you have the gross one, and OECD has developed a tool, and we can now integrate it into the surveys, the European surveys we have. And that saves each researcher months of work and prevents errors. And I see these developments going on in EOSC, where we plan to work together from social sciences with environment sciences in dealing with smart cities and climate neutral cities. And I think it was Stephen again is saying you need to understand the data, and that's where you need to train people to understand what's happening in data from other domains. Otherwise, we would make terrible mistakes, and it would take much, much longer.
Yeah, Tiziana, and then Niklas.
So about the best practices and success stories that derived from those. The European Open Science Cloud has the merit of having put together scientific communities from different backgrounds together, and also the infrastructures. And this is the first time that we see large projects where experts from different backgrounds can work together. In the EOSC project, which recently concluded, we adopted some structures to facilitate this. We run competence centers, which group experts from infrastructures and scientific domains to tackle the digital needs of specific research infrastructures. We have been running an early adopter program to support scientific projects and research communities which are not configured as a research infrastructure, and to support the long tail science. All of this resulted in faster adoption of science, of increased knowledge output, thanks to the deployment of existing solutions that have been proven and co-developed with reference user communities. And I like to quote a few examples. For example, infrastructures provide the federation services for authentication and authorization. These are proven solutions that scientific communities can adopt off the shelf. They deliver federated data management services, and the infrastructures have a track record in federation. They deliver federation services for workflow management in a distributed environment across all countries and digital infrastructures. They have been contributing also to standardization for generic services, computing, storage, and data management. All of this brings a wealth of technical solutions that research infrastructures have been adopting in the course of EOSC Hub, and I think this will continue in EOSC future. And this also means bringing complex infrastructures available through dedicated interfaces to end users. This has already been proven to be successful. We have reached in the last 3 years an increase of users in the order of 10,000 of new users approach and becoming active users of thematic services. And this has been possible thanks to the technical collaboration of research infrastructures, national research infrastructures, and infrastructures. This is something we hope can expand in the future. I like to also bring another element of success. Training has been already mentioned by previous speakers. In our experience, training is paramount to unlock digital solutions and make this accessible and really adopted in daily scientific workflows. We cannot have a successful EOSC without having sufficient training and co-design with users. This is a key enabler which is necessary on top of reliable technical solutions. Thank you.
Many thanks, Indiana, for this words. Niklas, please.
Yeah, so three quick examples, if I may. So the first one I think builds on Carol's talk and on the workflows and the tools and the work on RO Crate as a sort of fair digital object in practice. And that was work we've done with the EOSC Nordic project quite early on, which I think was really important in the sense that it opened up connections to both the earth science and the part of the biodiversity communities. And you find a lot of commonalities in the way that we interact with the users. And I think that reinforces the point that Carol was making, that these workflows, the tools, the methods, the e-instruments, if you so want, they really are a sort of first-class citizen in EOSC. I think the other example, and that actually builds on work in the EOSC Enhance project, where there is a really nice deliverable that sets out how identifiers and metadata is sort of hierarchically aggregated over the different disciplines and up in the clusters in the domains, and then eventually sort of onto some sort of generic level that can be harvested across disciplines. But I think that notion is really important, and that comes back to the work with the facilities. And we see that in our open core projects in EOSC-Life, where people are coming with quite specialized projects, but actually these communities have incredibly strong metadata standards and often very well established identifier schemes that have been operating for many years. And it's really important that we recognize those and incorporate them into the sort of general EOSC ecosystem. And I think one example of that, so I just we finish up with some work we're doing. So EOSC-Life has received uplift from the Commission to help respond to the COVID pandemic. And one of the things that we are doing is now working with the National Genome Surveillance Centers and trying to put as much as possible of the virus genome data into the public domain. And one among many reasons why that is important has to do with identifiers, because these open archives also give you an open, reusable, persistent identifier. And that enables the use of these identifiers in across data systems across the countries. And so you get a normative value where you can refer to the same thing across, for instance, hospital systems or national surveillance systems. And so that, I think, is another reason why it's really important to have strong identifiers, but recognize these community identifiers because they are already embedded into the science practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Niklas. I think you make the, it's also what you said, make the link also to what Ron said about the engagement. I think what is interesting here is that we all mentioned the engagement and the need to engage with the communities as well, but maybe what we can do now is to start discussing the levels of engagement into EOSC or science or things like that, because we are not engaged all in the same at the same level, and it's quite obvious depending on the needs, depending on the role we are playing in the infrastructure, in the organization, or in the society as well. So it can be maybe a first step to adapt the engagement strategy depending on the level of involvement into the EOSC. And for instance, what Stefan showed with the citizen science aspect, we know that the citizens can be involved in the EOSC, but not at the same level as the researchers. So I'd like to have very quickly your reaction on this point, and before closing the panel. Who would like to start?
I can start with just a quick thought. So we have run an open call to the community in EOSC-Life, and that was really very successful. We had a response rate that was about a factor of 10 above what we had actually expected. So we called it catastrophically successful, in the sense that we needed to quickly rejig what we did to support a lot of projects. But I think it's the same point in a way that Stefan was making on citizen science. You need to find the right interface for that engagement. You can't engage on your sort of premises. You have to go and engage with something which is relevant for that community. And I thought the Citizen Science project illustrated that really very well. You have an interface, an environment where it's actually very interesting and quite fun to do amateur astronomy. And if you have that, then people come. And I think science works in just the same way.
Thank you, Niklas. Rudolf, do you want to react?
Well, I think yes, and we had also the discussion yesterday. It's clear that the engagement will be greatly facilitated as soon as we have working services which are extremely reliable and which can be forgotten, let's say, at least from the researcher's perspective. It's just an underlying machinery which simply works. And then we need to advertise that things exist. Once they are taken and lead to productive work, there will be also some, let's say, self-promoting effect that the people, I mean, of course, the scientists and researchers, they talk to each other, and it will be known that there is a useful platform, that data is available, that workflow engines can be used, and that all this is exciting stuff which goes from one domain to the other. So of course, we shall not underestimate that the communities themselves will be strong advocates of something which is useful, and of course, because it's useful, it's usable. But for the time being, we are not yet there. There is still some groundwork to be done to put really all the machinery in place.
Thank you, Rudolf. Tiziana? Yeah.
I'm convinced that the best engagement outlets are the scientific communities that are already in place, and these are the best networks to really reach the researcher. However, what I feel is still missing as a focal point is having this coordinated support across experts among the different disciplines and from the infrastructures that will make data, scientific applications, and infrastructure integrated as a seamless service that is accessible to these end users. And personally, I like to see more of this coordinated support, because we cannot have adoption without trained users and without having this technology properly integrated as well. So having competency centers, which can be thematic, but also transversal, enabling vertical integration of existing proven solutions and the thematic use cases is paramount. So I believe a successful adoption will be depending on how well we can achieve results in these two directions.
Thank you, Tiziana. Ron, can you make the final word, please?
The final word. Well, let me refer to EOSC Future. And yes, it's a technical project. It's a technical challenge. And yes, we have to bring the science in, and we do the training and do widening, get more users, etc. But again, for this engagement, and in our basic structure, we call it the fishbone. You have the technicalities, you have the science, but two out of 6 fishbones are user engagements and user feedback. And I think the challenge in the future project is also to implement this and to let it be more than just some side activities. I think the engagement should be in the core of our activities, and that's the challenge we have, I think, in the EOSC future, to bring the researchers in as users, but also to provide us with feedback.
Thank you very much, Ron. Thank you, everyone, all of you, for this very clear and precise example and compliment that you provide to us. I'd like to conclude the panel, and maybe by saying that I think we all agree that we have to be ambitious regarding the goal for the EOSC, but humble regarding the achievement so far. And we have to be aware that there is a strong complexity of the EOSC ecosystem, and the willingness to cross-fertilize the discipline, but these two aspects imply to have less visible barriers, so maybe more difficulty to define the structure or the architecture of the EOSC. So this is maybe the points that we have, and that has been discussed this morning in the chat about the wording, for instance. So it may be a move from the organization point of view to the issues perspective, and that the EOSC can highlight to better explain and present the whole ecosystem. So I'd like to give the floor now to Mirjam for the wrap up.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. So I just would like to make a few remarks. First of all, thank you all for this very lively discussion, for this great panel, for the good presentations. And I see a lot of progress since the first time that there was an ESFRI EOSC workshop organized in January 2019. And this is fantastic. But as said before, there's a lot of coordination to be done to be able to offer the services for the end users, and also a lot of communication still to be done to explain EOSC to the end users, to make them aware of it, and that they will also finally use it. And as Rudolf said before, yes, EOSC has to work smoothly, and it has to be a very reliable infrastructure that is just serving the users. ESFRI will continue collaborating with EOSC and the research infrastructure communities, and we are, as said before, planning a next workshop in September, October. And I would like to hand over back to Suzanne to make the final remarks. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mirjam. So I'm not sure I have some other final remarks than what you said, just to say that I can reuse the words from Jennifer, presenting EOSC as an infrastructure continuum. I think it's a very interesting point that we can discuss and keep in mind to present and the ecosystem of the EOSC. I also would like to thank all the participants of this session this morning, and also all the people in the chat, because it was very lively and very useful for us to see how the discussion evolved. And yeah, I'm looking forward for the next step in establishing and strengthening the liaison between the EOSC Association and the ESFRI and Science Cluster. So thank you very much. And now I think we can announce the coffee break, or maybe Rob, you...
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Suzanne and everyone.